Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with a special hurricane outlook and discussion today. I'm going to go over the Colorado State University April 10th, 2013 hurricane seasonal forecast. As you may know, and you should know if you follow this kind of stuff, their forecast calls for a very busy hurricane season ahead, and I wanted to explain, hopefully in simple terms, what types of things they are looking at to make such a determination, sort of the why behind the forecast. So let's start off with their first paragraph here, that they anticipate that the 2013 Atlantic Basin hurricane season will have enhanced activity compared to the 1981 to 2010 climatology. The tropical Atlantic has anomalously warmed over the past several months, and it appears that the chances of an El Nino event for the summer and fall are unlikely, and they anticipate above average probability for major hurricanes making landfall along the United States and the Caribbean coastline. Now, obviously, this forecast does not indicate who may be at risk directly. That is impossible to know this far out. Steering patterns and whatnot, that's just very difficult, if not impossible, to ascertain at this point in time. So I thought that I would point out some of the more obvious puzzle pieces that Dr. Bill Gray and Dr. Phil Klotzbach are looking at and explain those to you in today's video blog. So their numbers, as you may know, 18 named storms, out of which 9 should become hurricanes, 4 of those hurricanes becoming major hurricanes, or category 3, 4, or 5. Now this one is very important to me because over time, over the past 100 years or so, going back to the historical record, major hurricanes are responsible for at least 80% of the damage caused by all hurricanes, and they are a substantial lethal force as well. So we need to take this one very seriously. 4 major hurricanes, 9 total hurricanes, so that's a lot of hurricanes out there, but do not diminish the importance of understanding the impacts from tropical storms and, quote, weak hurricanes as well. Think about it this way. If someone told you you were going to be involved in a head-on collision, but the good news was it was only going to be at 40 miles per hour, you wouldn't not wear your seatbelt. You wouldn't say, okay, well, if it's only 40 miles per hour, I won't wear my seatbelt because that's a lot better than a collision at 70 or 75 miles per hour. We don't think that way. You know, oh boy, I'm going to be in a head-on collision. I'm going to do everything I can to mitigate or minimize the effects of that head-on collision. And the same should hold true for looking at tropical cyclones. All of them have the potential to be deadly or to cause property damage where you are, your house, your business, your address, and that's what matters in the end, is what happens to you, right? The overall pattern suggests that we're going to have a very busy season with 18 named storms, 9 hurricanes, 4 of them becoming category 3 or higher. Where they track and what impacts they have directly remains to be seen. So the first puzzle piece is the warming of the Atlantic Tropical Development Region out here, the MDR as it's called, the main development region, to above average thresholds. And you can see by the color code here that this is the warm side and this is the cold side. Your cold anomalies are blue, the warm anomalies are especially the oranges and red. And there's quite a bit of this warm anomaly showing up through here between Africa and the Lesser Antilles. Now, a big reason behind this is a weaker than normal high pressure system sitting over the Atlantic Basin, creating weaker than normal trade winds blowing across the tropical Atlantic. This means that the water is not as stirred up, is not as mixed, and it's able to warm. It also means that the convergence of tropical waves, energy coming off of Africa, these easterly waves that get pushed off about 100 or so a year that migrate westward, they will be able to converge and pile the air up more efficiently than if we had trade winds that were really screaming across the tropics here due to a very, very strong or enhanced what we call positive North Atlantic oscillation, or a very strong high sitting out here dominating the Atlantic with very, very strong trade winds. That tends to push the lower part of these tropical waves out ahead of the upper levels of them. They can't vertically align, they can't converge, and it just makes them harder to get going. So the symptom is the warmer water. The cause of that symptom is this weaker than normal high pressure sitting out over the Atlantic, and that'll also induce these tropical waves to develop perhaps a little bit more efficiently, something we'll have to watch. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, you can clearly see very cold anomalies snaking their way off of South America and then spreading across the tropical Pacific. You also see the colder water in the Northeast Pacific between Hawaii and California and the Baja. A part of this is what's called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, a fancy way of saying that portions of the Pacific cool compared to normal for a period of time, and then you have in there this colder than normal tropical Pacific overall, not overwhelmingly colder. We're not looking at a La Nina or a true strong cold signal. And then you have the warmer than normal Atlantic basin with colder than normal water up in the subtropics, the opposite of what we saw for the most part last year. And all of these ingredients are coming together to paint the picture of a very busy hurricane season ahead. Speaking of the El Nino Southern Oscillation forecast, most of the model guidance suggests that in the the August, September, October time frame, that neutral, right here, will be the dominating phenomenon in the tropical Pacific. Better than a 50% probability of being in neutral conditions in the tropical Pacific, whereas El Nino is sitting down here at just a little bit more than 20% probability. So all in all, it looks like a neutral pattern in the tropical Pacific. And what that does, real quick, when you have it very warm out here, anomalously warm, and above normal water temperature profile in this area, that creates upward motion in the atmosphere, and that wind spreads out across the tropics of the Atlantic, the Caribbean especially, and that air sinks, it dries out. It's just a very negative influence on Atlantic basin activity. So when you have neutral conditions or La Nina, but it seems to be that neutral stands out more than others just by a little bit. This neutral signal is one that tends to harbinger in a much busier Atlantic hurricane season, and that looks to be the case. One way that we can follow that is through the Southern Oscillation Index, or the SOI, a measurement of the pressure differential between Tahiti and Darwin, Australia, out in the western and southwestern Pacific. Typically when this number is positive, like it is now, the 30-day value sitting at 10.8, that's a plus 10. Typically when the number is positive, the trade winds across the tropical Pacific are at least average, if not a little bit above average, and you mix the water more, you upwell water off of South America because of that strong trade wind pattern, and you keep the Pacific, most importantly here, from warming anomalously. It does not warm up more than it should, and that's what we're seeing right now is a positive SOI. And unless we see this really tank and go into the negative phase, which is indicative of a slowing of the trade winds, unless that happens, we're more than likely going to see neutral conditions prevailing in the tropical Pacific. Another aspect of the forecast that is interesting to me, they point this out, not this particular graphic, but some of the research in the sea level pressure and the amount of moisture available in the deep tropics. This is an interesting graphic from the UK Met, the United Kingdom Met Office. This is the ensemble mean, it's a bunch of computer models and their averages, of anomalous precipitation in the July, August, September time frame in the deep tropics. And actually it's global. But here's your positive anomalies, the blues, the greens, and the purples. Your negative anomalies, or less than normal precip, are the yellows and reds. Look through the deep tropics here. Look at that. A positive anomaly aimed east-southeast to the west-northwest out of the deep tropics towards the Greater Antilles and the southeast United States. Interesting that the UK Met model indicating above normal precip in the deep tropics during the meat of the hurricane season. Why would that be? Because of enhanced tropical cyclone development potential. On the other side of that coin, look in the tropical Pacific here, an anomalous negative side of precip, the precipitation below normal. There is a band of above normal here just above that, indicating probable East Pacific hurricane activity, but it is interesting to note that the ensemble forecast from the UK Met Office indicating a positive precipitation anomaly across the tropical Atlantic, more than likely due to an increase in tropical cyclone activity. What about analog years? Well, what are those? Well, this is what they say. There were 5 hurricane seasons since 1900 with characteristics most similar to what we observed in the February to March 2013 timeframe. None of the 5 analog years that we selected had a significant El Nino during the peak of the hurricane season. 4 out of the 5 years had above average net tropical cyclone activity. We anticipate the 2013 hurricane season will have more activity than the average of our 5 analog years. We primarily have predicted an increase in the number of named storms and named storm days from the average of the 5 analog years due to a likely increase in the number of weaker storms being detected. Basically because of better satellite technology and aircraft recon, some of those weaker, smaller storms won't get past us, and they will get tacked on to the total number of named storms. So what are those 5 years that are most similar to where we were in February and March of this year? 1915, 1952, 1966, and then in the modern hurricane era, 1996 and 2004. I don't think that needs any explanation. You remember 04, and certainly 96 was big for the Carolinas. 1915 featured an impact on New Orleans and Galveston, I believe. So the 5 years that seem to be most similar to where we are now, there you go, 1915, 52, 66, 96, and 04. This doesn't mean we will have tracks exactly similar to what we saw back then, or the same, I should say. It wouldn't be exactly similar, right? That doesn't make sense. But what I'm saying, the pattern doesn't necessarily have to perfectly match, but this does give us a guidepost as to what we might expect. Bottom line, be ready for the impacts of tropical storms and hurricanes. Don't take any of them lightly. Remember that head-on collision analogy. You wouldn't discount a 30 or 40 mile per hour head-on collision and not wear your seatbelt. So don't think of hurricanes as being weak or strong. Think of them as being a threat to you, your family, your business, your well-being, and take them seriously. You can follow all of our activities this year on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @HurricaneTrack. Facebook.com/HurricaneTrack to follow us on Facebook. And we have a mobile app. It's not a web app. It's a true native iPhone app that runs on the iPhone, iPod Touch, and on the iPad. Looks great. Search Hurricane Track, all one word, in the App Store to get the app today. And of course, you can follow us along on HurricaneTrack.com as we post blog posts daily during the hurricane season. Of course, we'll have our live video coverage during hurricane landfall events and some tropical storms. Again, I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. I appreciate you tuning into this Hurricane Outlook and Discussion special video blog. I'm certain to have more of those as we get into the hurricane season ahead.